Professor Wergeles here. Make sure you save your changes in location.html. We're actually going to come back to the slides. Let's look at some concepts and we'll continue into order matters in the next coding exercise. Starting from HTML DOM, we're going to open up these slides. Let's talk about what the DOM is so we can understand what's happening here. Now, with the HTML DOM, JavaScript can access and change all the elements on an HTML document. Now, we've seen the get element by ID. You'll see that document keyword. So the document is actually the DOM, and then I'm using JavaScript to access the DOM. Get element by ID is actually a DOM method. We'll talk about the differences between JavaScript and the DOM. Now, with the object model, that's the DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model. With the object model, JavaScript gets all the power it needs to create dynamic HTML. Like we saw, we can change all the HTML elements in a page. We can change the attributes. We can change the styles. We can remove existing HTML elements and attributes. We can add new HTML elements and attributes. We can react to all existing HTML events in the page. And we can create new HTML events in the page, depending on what you want to do. Now, that is a lot of power. Here's an example of what the DOM looks like. Every time a page is loaded in a browser, it's actually going to create what's called the DOM, which is the Document Object Model. It's actually going to be a tree of objects. You'll see here the HTML DOM model is constructed as a tree of objects. Now, when the page is loaded, it's going to create this DOM. Here's the document. That's going to be the DOM. So every time I call document dot, that's going to be the DOM here. You'll see the root element is the HTML tag. So you remember I have the doc type. Next comes the HTML tag. Next comes the head. Well, here's the head. You'll see that is a child of the HTML element. If I come back to the page we just wrote, here's the HTML element, and inside the HTML is the head. So actually head would be a child of the HTML, which is going to be shown here in the slide. So here I have the HTML element. Then I have the head. Inside the head is the title. Inside the title is going to be some text. So you can imagine a tree-like structure being created. Now, inside the HTML element after the head, I have the body. Inside the body, let's say I have an A, which is a link. Inside the link, I have an href, which is an attribute. Inside the start and close tag, I have text for the link. The next element in the body is an h1 tag. Inside the h1, I'll have text called my header. And the tree will go on and on depending how big your page is. So every time you have a child, so I have the HTML element, now I have the head, that's going to be a child. Now I have a title, that's going to be a child. So you can imagine this tree being created after the browser renders your page. So after the browser loads your page, this tree is going to be created, and that's called the DOM. It's the DOM tree of objects. Every one of these is an object. It's an object because it has different attributes, it has different text, so it has a lot of data consistent inside of that object. So the DOM is a W3 standard. The W3 is the Worldwide Consortium. It is where you go to find the standards for web development. Now the DOM defines a standard for accessing documents. Based off the W3C defines the DOM as this. The W3C document object model, the DOM, is a platform and language-neutral interface that allows programs and scripts to dynamically access and update the content, structure, and style of a document. That's the definition of the DOM. So you'll see here it's an interface. It's an interface that has methods and attributes to allow programs and scripts to dynamically access and update the content, structure, and style of a document. Now, based off the W3C DOM, there are different standards which are separated into three different parts. We have the core DOM, which is the standard model for all document types. We have the XML DOM, which is for XML documents, and we have the HTML DOM, which is for HTML documents. We'll mainly be focusing on the HTML DOM in this course. However, you want to be aware that there are other document object models for different types of standards. Now remember, the HTML DOM is a standard object model, and programming interface, keyword interface there, you'll want to remember that for an exam, for HTML. Okay, so it's a programming interface. It's going to define the HTML elements as objects, the properties of all HTML elements, the methods to access all HTML elements, and the events for all HTML elements. So the DOM has objects, properties, methods, and events. And how do I know what these are? So in other words, the DOM is a standard for how to get, change, add, or delete elements. So basic CRUD operations. So I'm going to get, change, add, or delete elements. That's a basic CRUD. So the DOM is the interface for CRUD operations on HTML elements. Okay, CRUD is create, read, update, and delete. That's database operations. So you can think of the same for HTML. Now we're going to look at different examples that use the DOM and how DOM is going to affect our HTML and JavaScript interaction. Stick with Professor Wergeles and we'll see you in the next video.